Well, I'm Temple Grandin. I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. I had no speech until age 4. I had some great teachers working with me when I was really young. Today, and even now, past retirement age, still doing research. I was just out at a sheep operation this morning, helping them with designing a sheep handling facility.
I feel honored and privileged to be here with you. Thank you so much for making the time.
It's good to be here.
With all of your accomplishments, for me, the most important thing is that you're such a beacon of hope for parents. And we work with parents with young kids diagnosed with autism. And the majority of their questions are, what's going to happen in the future? Will my child be okay? Will he be able to live independently? And if they see somebody like you with all the accomplishments that you have, I feel like it's really.
I got to tell you, somebody else is on the autism spectrum. Elon Musk.
Oh yes.
See him right there? And you see these Post-it notes? These are 6-year-old Post-it notes. I put them in there 6 years ago. I marked the pages where it described all the characteristics.
And now you called it.
What these 6-year-old Post-it notes are marking.
That's amazing.
And now he would be the Asperger type with no speech delay.
Yes, so it's such a range as well, and it's amazing.
This is the problem.
Yes.
Is you have such a range. Now, a lot of little kids, when they're little, look really bad. I looked bad. I was looked real severe when I was little. No speech, constant tantrums, rocking, all the standard behaviors. But I did not have epilepsy. And that was one of the things that I was tested for when I was very little. Also got into an extremely good early intervention speech therapy program.
That's
also a good preschool where I was taught turn taking. And children in my generation were taught manners in a real systematic way.
Yes.
You know, saying please and thank you, not reaching across the table, not monopolizing the conversation. These were important things that I learned.
And with the turn taking, do you feel that it made a difference that there were neurotypical peers around? Was it beneficial to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
And I went to a special little nursery school, and then by the time I was 5, I was mainstreamed into a normal classroom. But I want to add, it was a very small class, 12 students.
Okay.
Classroom with 25 or 30 students, I would have had to have had a one-on-one aide. But in this small, old-fashioned 50s classroom, it was quiet, where all the kids worked on their arithmetic workbooks at the same time. Then they'd take turns reading out loud. You know, that worked.
That's something that we advocate for. If a parent is looking for a school, that one of the things that they need to look out for is the ratio of children to teacher.
Yes.
And it should be as low as they can. I do believe in a natural setting.
The main thing you do all that one-to-one therapy for is to get little kids talking, or to get them jump-started. That's a little kids program to get the speech started. And a lot of the programs now with the label of ABA are very, very different. And the thing and they've improved a lot. The thing I want to emphasize is when you're working with little ones, it's who that teacher is. Because the thing that I have observed is a really good teacher, regardless of the name of the therapy, knows how to push just enough to get the kid to advance without causing sensory overload.
Exactly.
And some kids you can push a bit more than others. I call it the knack. It's almost like they have an innate ability to work with these kids. So with little ones, and I'm talking 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, I always ask parents, is the child improving? Okay, what is improving? Let's be specific. Speech, turn taking. It's very important to learn how to wait and take your turn. And that was taught with board games, when I was little. And then basic skills, dressing, showering, eating with utensils, just basic skills.
I wanted to ask you about the sensory overload, because in one of your talks you mentioned that it's really good to have the autistic child, any child really with sensory sensitivities, be in control of that sensory item. So,
Some good successes with, let's say, getting over being afraid of a vacuum cleaner or a hairdryer or a buzzer on a scoreboard down in the gymnasium, with letting the child control it. So you give the child a vacuum cleaner, you get to turn it on and off and use it, where you control it. And that vacuum cleaner might go from the most hated thing to their favorite thing. Very young child in school, I was terrified of this giant vacuum cleaner. It seemed like it was this big. It probably was only about this big, but I was a little tiny kid. Mr. Russell's vacuum cleaner with a giant bag on it that inflated. What they should have done is let me play with Mr. Russell's vacuum cleaner.
exactly.
I've been afraid of it. I was terrified of that vacuum cleaner. I was sure it was going to suck me up. Now I'm 5 at this point.
Yes.
And I remember it really well.
I think a lot of the accommodations that we have to make, not just for little kids, but also for adults in the work environment, if we really look into ourselves and we become self-aware, these are accommodations that any individual, they might differ, the type of accommodation, but we all need specific changes in our environments to cope better. If we look at it from that point of view, and we don't just put our kids under a magnifying glass and we see, okay, well, all of us have different sensory sensitivities. We might be overstimulated or understimulated. But if we give the control back to the child, then
one of the things in the workplace and in the classroom, one of the most important things is some individuals can see flicker on especially cheap LED lights. Yes. And this is a must fix. I don't have this problem, but they've got all of these new electronic lights. I've got a real cheap one in a desk lamp. I can see a little tiny flicker. It doesn't bother me, but that's going to bother other people. This is where sensory issues are extremely variable. And I don't have that problem, but I've got some sound sensitivity. And there's so many of these different kinds of lights now that you might have to switch out the lights and get some different ones that don't flicker, or get the kid's desk over by the window. Another way you can work with it, but they're getting hard to buy now, are the old-fashioned incandescent bulbs, the Edison type energy wasting light bulbs, the hot ones. They don't flicker. So if you can find some of those, you can put that in the lamp next to the kid's desk or next to their desk at work. Now, I still have problems with, I can't hear in a noisy environment. Auditory processing problems. And so this makes, like, socializing at a restaurant, my students are there yakking away, and they're also yakking really fast, and I can't hear some of the conversation. Never have been able to.
And how do you manage that? Do you just kind of avoid those situations?
No, I go in situations, and I usually strike up a conversation with the person beside me, because that's about the only person I can hear.
Yeah.
Really fast conversations. I never have liked stand-up comedians, because by the time I laugh at one joke, he said 3 more.
Also looking at dual processing, for me, that was a big thing working with kids on the spectrum, where I didn't want to force eye contact so much, because a lot of our kids do.
Too much emphasis on that. And the other thing is it puts load on, like your central processor in the brain is really small. So it's difficult to process trying to listen to a conversation and then looking at the eyes at the same time.
Yes.
One time, I was really tired. I was at the airport, and I had to change the ticket. So I go up to the ticket counter. I don't even remember what airport it was now. And I just couldn't look at the agent because I couldn't hear if I looked at the agent.
And I think that leads us into having dual modes of communication, which is so important. Even if your child is verbal, to have that extra mode of communication. Talking about the 3 types of brains, the 3 types of autistic brain, and I think
in my book, The Autistic Brain.
Another book of yours.
All kids just to get outside. And
Yes,
like there's a
so
lot of kids that live
important.
in my neighborhood and they never go outside. I didn't
Yes.
even know there were kids in this neighborhood until I watched the school bus pick them up. Well, the first
Yeah.
project in there is my sister and I had rock collections when we were in primary school. And we
Yeah.
bust rocks apart. And you need to wear safety goggles to do that. But we bust rocks apart, see what they look like inside, and then we displayed them on shelves in the tool shed. We spent a lot of time doing this. And I just gave a
Yes.
talk last night virtually to a Seattle program. And my host there said he had his kids out there busting up rocks, and they were having a great time doing it.
Yes, it's so important. We see our kids evolve as they go into nature, and they open up, and they have more things to communicate about, and their interests just expand. We find so important is do you utilize their interests and not just use it as a reinforcer, but actually get
Well,
in there, delve into
the
it.
other problem is a lot of kids aren't getting exposed to enough different things to develop interests. I mean, one problem that's
Yes.
happened in some of our schools, we've taken art out, sewing and cooking and auto mechanics and welding and the school play and theater and music. How can a child get interested in something they're never
Exactly.
exposed to?
Yes.
How to end up in the cattle industry? I was exposed to it as a teenager.
Yeah, and it's like you said, just a little bit of pushing, but not too much to
Right.
elicit a meltdown.
Kids are not learning how to work.
Yeah.
That's another big problem. It starts with chores, a volunteer job, maybe at a church or some other place,
Mhm.
schedule outside the home with somebody else
Yeah.
as boss.
I think the scheduling there is very important. Having a task list and knowing, okay, this is the time I go, having those transition cues and then knowing what is expected of me at work, and then once it's done, you know what's coming next as well. So to have those visuals in place might make a massive
Well, the
difference.
other thing that's a problem when the kids get older, when little kids, if a 3-year old, I can give my standard talk on early intervention. But once
Mm.
kids get older, I have to know more about them. Like how verbal
Yeah.
are they? Can they do their basic skills? How are they doing in school? What exactly is their problem? I
Yeah.
need information. And the,
Mm.
and the problem is, and this is what I find with the verbal thinkers, they tend to overgeneralize. Let's talk a
Mm.
little bit about the different kinds of thinking.
Yeah.
And I think in photorealistic pictures. And the HBO movie Temple Grandin shows it perfectly. And that's called
Love
an
that movie.
object visualizer. That's the correct scientific name for it. Then the visual spatial thinker is the more mathematical or musical kid. And then you have the verbal thinker. And there's science that supports this. And since the autistic brain was published, there's been more science that's done that totally supports this. And then a lot of people are kind of mixtures in between. But the thing I'm learning about verbal thinkers is they tend to really overgeneralize. And if you
Mm.
have, let's say, a nonverbal 10-year-old, I'm going to probably have quite a different program for him than I would for a 10-year-old that's fully verbal working at
Yes,
grade level.
of
And that
course.
kids aren't learning money. This is stuff that
Mm.
my generation may learn. I got 50 cents a week for allowance, and
Yeah.
if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I
Yeah.
was
With a friend or an au pair or somebody or a parent, taking them out and practicing these skills,
exactly.
because it really it takes some repetition, but it is going to become interest based, because you can always, if you are learning somebody in terms of money, you can always go and buy their favorite figurines after a week of doing chores. So
That's
there's
right.
always something.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
The thing is, some parents are too overprotective. They go, little Tony or Annie or whatever the child's name is, we'll order the hamburger for them. I'm going, no, got to learn to
No.
order their own food. There's a tendency for parents to overprotect because I'm seeing maybe a 16-year-old fully verbal student doing well in school who's never gone shopping,
Yeah.
working on the having jobs, real jobs before they graduate from high school.
And then also maybe including some of the soft skills, like helping with self-awareness, helping with self-regulation, coping skills, so that they have a way, if they are in, in a shopping mall, that they know, okay, I've got a sensory sensitivity towards sound. I can take headphones
You
with,
can take headphones. Now, the thing about headphones is don't wear them all the time. Because if you wear, your brain will get more sensitive to that really noisy train station or something like that.
Yes.
Then take them off. But you can have them with you. You still that gives you the control.
Let them pack their own sensory backpack and putting it in, because it just helps with the independence again.
Well, and then you get into things like there's been issues about, some people have to like fiddle with their hands. So right now I've been fiddling with this. There's all kinds of these little fidget toys. Here's a fidget toy. Yes. This is the model of the truck I learned to drive on.
Oh, amazing.
On the steering column. And a very nasty clutch. And I drove 400 kilometers on dirt roads before I did traffic. It's going to take longer. In a totally safe place. Mm-hmm. And my aunt's mailbox on the ranch was 6 kilometers away. Every day, she was in the truck with me. I drove that truck up to the mailbox and back. 30, that would be, I got to do metric now, like 75 some kilometers a week. The driver's education programs pushes them too fast. Yes. Driving around an empty stadium parking lot. And then we start doing some side streets. We can go practice in those deserted places. Mm. Now I was just on a plane yesterday and we flew over all the oil field roads. I look at that and I go, that's where you practice driving.
Yes.
Let's just start where it's not going to be a hazard. Now, this truck had the world's worst clutch. And so we didn't start where I could lurch it through the patio gate where she parked it. We took it out in the center of the horse pasture. Yeah. And if I talk about this, I see it. I see the patio gate was light blue.
Speaking about mentors, you mentioned that Dr. Carlock was your science teacher.
That's right.
And he was somebody that got you into your interest and what you were wanting to learn about.
Well, you see, now this brings up another thing about exposure. If you watch the HBO movie, they show an actual clip of a movie that was shown in a science class at school about optical illusions, and it showed the optical illusion room. And I got interested in that. Now they said to me, you've got to figure out how to make it. And there was no internet to look it up on. Figure out how to make it. And I got really obsessed with that for a couple of years. But I was exposed to that, along with getting exposed to the cattle industry. I think a lot of kids today are getting addicted to video games. They're not getting else. And what Mr. Carlock did, what motivated me to study, is now studying was a pathway to the goal of becoming a scientist. And my mother, my really excellent third grade teacher when I was 8 years old, was another really important person. And there were some good people in the business world. There was a contractor starting a small construction company, and he'd seen some of my drawings. And here's some of my drawings right here. That I learned a long time ago to sell my work rather than selling myself.
One of the moms wanted to know, what are the challenges and triumphs that you went through when you were a child?
The worst one was bullying and teasing in high school. That was the worst, absolute worst time of my life. And another thing that was good when I was in primary school is I went to the same school that the neighborhood kids went to. And that was good. Was not bullied, was friends who shared interests. Yeah. Now, for me, it was horses, electronics, and the Model Rocket Club. Another kid, it might be music. It might be a school play. It might be a robotics club. It could be an art, doing art.
That's why it's so important to find those interests and then actually help them to go to these clubs, because it's great to have the interest, but if you're not going to share it with friends, that's an opportunity.
To develop the interest, they need to go to they need to try different things. We've got today. It's kids aren't getting exposed to enough things to figure out what they might want to do. When I was in primary school, my favorite classes were art, sewing, and woodworking.
with the bullying, Dr. Temple, what would you say would your advice be for a youngster or a parent if a child is getting bullied? Do you think that there's anything that we can do before it happens so that they might not be bullied?
Yeah, the thing is, bullies tend to pick the person that was different. Elon Musk pushed down the stairs and injured his face. He was a total nerd. Now, another thing, what made him successful, learned how to work at an early age. Also exposed to a lot of different things. His family traveled. He went everywhere, exposed to tools and building things. Also quite entrepreneurial. He sold a video game for $500 that he'd made. And he tried to open a video game shop in the local shopping center, and he was too young to sign the lease. But the thing is that he had, he was out exposed to a lot of different things. You see, this is where when you get on the fully verbal side of thing, what I'm seeing is I think the label sometimes holds them back on the career side. Now, where the label is helpful is on relationships with teenagers and adults. Then they understand, why their relationships might not be going well. You see, I get interested in what I do, where most people are more into what they feel. And it was on the relationships where knowing the diagnosis was almost a relief. There were other people had the same problem, but on the work, on getting employment, I think it's actually holding some kids back.
That is such an important point, because I've got quite a few autistic advocate friends, and the relationship and employment, those are the two topics that we need to speak about. How are we going to collaborate somehow with employers and building relationships effectively?
I think relationships are going to get through shared interests. Like there's a lady that's autistic, and her husband's probably on the spectrum. They met at a science fiction meeting, and she was telling me that their idea of romantic evening is go out to a really fancy restaurant, white tablecloths, candles, because you got to set the stage for a really romantic conversation about computer data storage. They're just so confused. The other thing we need to be looking at on the job front is a lot more kind of backdoor getting into jobs through the informal contacts. And I visited a meeting we had at a food safety laboratory. And they told me about an autistic person they had hired, and it was a contact through a housekeeper in somebody's house. You see, they love this person just through informal contacts, and they took the time to train them. The thing is I can't remember verbal sequence. If someone says, well, this is how you unjam the copier. You do boom, boom, and they just show me, and they say it. I can't remember the sequence. I need to write down the steps. Even now, pilot's checklist of writing down the steps. I like to know exactly what I'm supposed to do.
It's going to help the employers too, to actually be better and more systematic, I feel.
And then some jobs are just really bad. A super busy takeout window at a McDonald's, something like that, be a bad choice. A chaotic clothing store at Christmas was another disaster that did not work. Another bad job, I see the waitress balancing 3 plates on her arm, and she can remember 6 different orders without writing them down. I'd be fired the first night.
Just going back to relationships, I feel it's definitely important with the shared interest, but also just having those open communication channels and saying, okay, well, you're giving me this message, but your face is not showing the same message, then it's confusing to me sometimes, because I know that a lot of times some of my autistic friends need to learn social cues and rules.
One thing that's been a problem sometimes with college students is carrying on a one-to-one conversation with the teacher. And I kind of made a rule when I was in college, 2 questions per class. That's the rule. Now it'd be an hour-long class. 2 questions
Yeah.
per class. I would just make kind of a rule there.
Yeah.
You can tell the same joke twice, that's it.
Okay. That's a good rule for me.
Kind of like easy rules. And there's been a
Mm.
lot of discussion now about masking. And
Mm.
I think a lot of that problems is sensory, and I think another thing, it's problems with anxiety. I had
Yes.
terrible anxiety.
Yes.
I had this horrible anxiety. My nervous system was like ready to fight off a lion when there was no lion.
Mm.
It was in a constant state of terror for no reason. And then when I went on the antidepressant, it calmed everything down. My anxiety started at puberty. A lot of misuse of medication. There's way too many antipsychotic drugs given out to little kids.
Yes.
I just went to a very interesting veterinary meeting about medication for dogs. And the thing that shocked me, the veterinarian was doing a better job than a lot of doctors were. Because the veterinarian was recommending you try one drug and see what it does before you try another one.
Yes.
And I've seen kids that throw like 3 prescriptions at it. Way too many drugs given out to little kids. Way too many.
Yes, I totally agree.
And the veterinarians are totally getting away from the antipsychotic drugs, things like Risperdal. But there are some adults where, as I went through my 20s, I got more and more anxious. And if I hadn't gone on the medication in my early 30s, I don't think I would have done a lot of things in my career that I was able to do, because my health was also totally failing. I had uncontrollable colitis attacks, and that cleared up. Not total, but 90% cleared up with the antidepressant medication.
Yeah, I think it's definitely about taking it responsibly with guidance, getting the information that they need to get. That is it.
Thinking in Pictures got information. Another book that's got information on medication is this one, The Way I See It.
Which therapy do you feel should be included? 3 to 6 in that age group.
You got that yet. The little ones need 20, the 3-year-olds need 20 hours of one-to-one. I don't really care what the name of the therapy is, to work on getting the speech going. Also, sensory integration type activities are part of a good therapy. Slow down when you talk to the little kid. Slow down when you talk to them. Give them time to respond.
Yeah.
They're like a slow internet connection. You got to give them time to respond.
And then one of our moms wanted to know, her child is currently doing therapy with one of the AIMS therapists. So she's at home with the child, but she's taking her on quite a few outings. And
How old is the kid?
4 years old. And she wanted to know, when can she look into taking the child to school? Should she do it as soon as possible to expose him to more of the social setting?
I was exposed to other children, starting at a really early age. I get worried about the kid that's just at home and not exposed to other kids. I went into a regular school at age 5, but it was this very small, quiet, old-fashioned classroom.
Are there any specific milestones that we should look for in terms of improvement every year? Or should we look at the more holistic improvement over a longer period of time?
Are you getting continuous improvement? A lot of parents have told me, once they got their kid out doing a job, and there was one young man, he worked at an office supply store, and his parents said he blossomed when he got out doing things, being successful at doing things. Doing things on his own.
Especially for this child, because we've worked with him for quite a while now, and he's an extremely happy child. But do you push him to learn stuff that he might not be interested in?
Verbal, fully verbal?
Verbal, some echolalia, so there might be a bit of challenges with comprehension at times.
Well, let me just explain. There's 3 ways that the brain can have problems with speech. not hearing it clearly. Okay, test for deafness, they're not deaf, but if the grown-ups talk really fast, it sounds like blah, 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 blah. Don't hear the hard consonant sounds. Like let's say you said dog, I may hear oh. That might, or if you said cat, I might hear ah. That might be all I hear. And then sometimes I can figure it out through the context.
Okay.
So not hearing the auditory detail. Then the next problem is can't get the speech out. I had problems with that. And then the echolalia, the child might be memorizing a TV show, but he doesn't know what it means. Kids can learn to talk. You've got to, what I would recommend doing there is take some lines out of the movie that he's reciting and use them in the real world. Toys and foods and things of this sort.
Mom and Dad wanted to know, she likes to break things. You know if there's a reason behind it.
A computer or an iPad or a phone.
Yes, exactly.
And does she like to use technology?
She loves her iPad.
Yes. Now, does she good to her iPad? Without knowing more about why she's breaking the iPad, you might have a sensory issue where an electronic device makes a certain noise, and then they break it.
Okay.
Or there are some that it's almost like an epileptic seizure, and they'll break stuff. And then after they kind of come to, they don't remember that they did it. See, there's a lot of reasons why they might break stuff. I want to tell you about Grant Bonnier, the eco artist. Grant, the eco artist. You can look him up online. And Grant was autistic, and when he was a little kid, he would just shred paper. So his mom started him making art with taking paper he ripped up and pasting it onto. Now he's made a piece of art he sold for $30,000. But his mom, Grant's fully verbal. He's worked in an office supply store. That was very successful. He was very proud of the other night. I went to dinner with him, and he took out his credit card and paid for the meal. Sometimes it's sensory. They break it so it stops beeping or doing some sensory thing they don't like.
Yes. I really like the story of Grant. I'm going to look him up. This is working on their interests, and it can be so amazing.
What his mother did was to take his interest in ripping up paper and started him making art with it. You see, now when I talk about this, I see it. It's not abstract.
That's amazing.
I see it. Verbal thinkers, you overgeneralize.
So one of our 16-year-olds wanted to ask you a question, and his question was, what do you do for fun? So he wanted to...
I went to the first movie just the other day. I like to watch when SpaceX sent their first rocket ship up to the space station. I geeked out in a 2.5-hour live feed of docking with the space station. That's the kind of stuff that I like to do. I look at a lot of space and science stuff. Science and nature is my lunchtime pleasure reading. One thing that helped me is get up in the morning, get dressed, take a shower, dressed for work by 7 in the morning every day. It helps. It makes a difference.
Yeah, that routine, and also just sticking to it, even if things change around you, because then at least there's some constant.
Yeah, and also I let the shower just go on my face, and if I'm going to get out of that shower, I feel a whole lot better. But having things to do, and that's what I started working on a new book on visual thinking. I want to make it very clear that you can have people with autism that are visual thinkers like me. Some are more math thinkers, and some are word thinkers. They often love history. They love facts. We'll be really, really good at specialized retail. There's 2 success stories that work in sales at a big bank, and they sell specialized financial products. There's been some successes with selling cars and car dealerships. Even when they were teenagers, they were doing that. Now, my kind of mind, of course, is the art and design, but things like mechanical stuff. And then if the school is taking out mechanics shop, how can the kid get introduced to it? Find out whether he likes it or doesn't like it. I think kids need to get exposed to enough stuff so they can figure out what they might want to do.
If parents don't have the financial means to hire therapists, Personally, I believe that they will be able to include some of the strategies that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the thing I would explain, the mother is going to get totally stressed out if she tries to do it all herself. Okay, we got parts of the U.S. where there's no services, but they got very strong church groups. I said, go to your church group, get some grandmother volunteers to come in and work with this 2-year-old that's not talking. The worst thing you can do with 2-year-olds that are not talking is to just let them sit in the corner. No, you got to start working on them now. Of course, I'd recommend the Way I See It book, and get started working with that kid. And you're going to find that some of these grandmothers have the ability to do this and some don't. I call it the knack. But the absolute worst thing you can do is to do nothing. I want 20 hours a week of one-to-one therapy with an effective teacher. And I'm going to define an effective teacher as more words, more turn taking, learning how to wait and take turns, and bathing, learning those things. The other thing is, a good teacher knows how to push, but the kid should like going to therapy. And also, with a lot of these kids, especially when they get a little older, give them some choices. A lot of parents totally underestimate their kids. I've gone to some summer camps for kids with autism, and one of them has a lot of boating activities. And the parents just couldn't believe that their nonverbal teenager got on a boat and actually liked it. And you have to make sure that you let them look at the boat and watch other people go on it first, so it's not a surprise. And then another camp, they come out to a camp and there's no electronics there, no TVs, nothing electronic, and their autistic kid ends up loving it. And one of the things that camp helps show the parent, is that the kid actually can do things. Okay, you might have a nonverbal kid, they're capable of doing more stuff than what you think they can do. There are some nonverbals that learn to type independently. You might want to look at Tito Muckapatehe. How can I talk if my lips don't move?
Carly Fleischman, Ida Gadar.
Yeah, Carly Fleischman. She'd be another one. Carly's voice. I have been buried under years of dust. Just came out. And they learn to type, but you've got to, you can't be holding their wrist. Okay to hold the wrist to get them started, but eventually you've got to get your hands off of them. But I think a lot of children today, they're terrified of making a mistake. And I think, again, a lot of that goes back to not experimenting with just a bunch of old stuff. He's a visual thinker. I can see things that solve problems. Now, what I can't do is I can't do algebra. And so in a lot of states in the U.S., I wouldn't be able to graduate from high school. So what would I do? Well, I get involved with doing maintenance in factories, because that's a route into designing entire factories. I've seen people with high school education be in charge of building an entire factory.
That brings us back to what you said in one of your talks, where you said we all need each other. We all need the different kinds of minds.
I take this Google program we're using right now. Somebody had to design the interface to make it easy to use, but a programmer had to make it work. That's different minds working together. They have complementary skills. Language thinkers get too hung up on the label. You see, where I'm seeing different people, I'm seeing a guy who's really weird, undiagnosed autism, owns a metal fabrication company. He sells equipment all around the world, and he's autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, and a horrible high school student. Took a welding class, started a small business, and it grew.
Really, really want to thank you so much for your time, Dr. Temple. It's so lovely to hear you and see you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be here this afternoon.